with the idea of teaching. We started with the idea that what we want on our fields and courts are teachers. And I have up here, I hope that you can see, we wanted coaches that taught the game as opposed to coaching the game. And when I say that, obviously we want them coaching the game as well. But I think when I look, when we look out at coaches, we see those coaches that their players, they're like pawns on a chessboard that the coach is using in order to play a game against the other coach. And of course, that's the extreme. But what we really wanted were coaches that were teaching kids about how to play, about when they should do things, teaching kids how to make decisions on the field, on the court. And so I spent the entire year looking for that and talking about teaching and talking about what the game looks like and talking about how players can have an understanding of those things. When we moved on, in our second year, guys, I kind of stole that program that Chassa was doing, the Shift Y program, and we sat with our coaches and we asked these questions, right? And a lot of you guys will remember, why do you coach? Why do you coach the way you do? What's it like to be coached by you? And how do you define success? But we took it and the way we handled it was a little bit different. We bastardized it a little bit because we moved on to our players, and we asked them the same questions. We asked them, why do you play? And you can see, why do you play the way you do? What is it like to coach you, or what is it like to be your teammates? And then we took it another step, and in our mandatory parent meetings, we talked to our parents and we asked them the exact same questions. Why do you support your kid playing sports, right? We tied them into the exact same questions. And what we really wanted to do, you guys, is we wanted to get to something bigger than just sports success. We wanted to get to something bigger than winning or glory or whatever the things are that are the low-hanging fruit for why you coach and why you play. We went from our coaches, they're competitive souls, right? They love the competition. They like to move forward. We wanted to get beyond that. We wanted to get to a spot where we were talking about those things, that are very important that we can do in the schools. I know, and I think most people are about the same. When we look at our proportionality survey here at Arapahoe, and just one example, 2 years ago, before we started getting impacted by this, we had just over half of our student body was participating in one of our athletic programs. Maybe more importantly, we had almost 1,800 single sport athletes. So 1,800 people that were captive audience, for our coaches to teach, to give them skills that would suit them later, to give them those life skills that would come in handy so that they could be successful. And we wanted to get to those things. We wanted to get to those ideas and what we wanted to do on the court, what we wanted to do on the field, what we wanted to do with our athletes, what we wanted them to get from our athletic programs that was far beyond the, success on the court. And so we went through this program and we spent a lot of time talking about it. And we, when you think about these things, and I know a lot of people have thought about these things that are important that we teach in our athletic programs. But when we look at them, I have this, this list of things that we came up with. And these were some of the things that we could do through our athletic programs. And just like, just like in a class, if we take a look at any one of, or the disciplines that we teach in school, obviously no coach can teach all of these. We wanted coaches to take a look and make a determination what couple of these things they might be able to focus on that were important to them, that kids came out of their programs with. When we add some of the things, obviously, that kids and parents wanted in there, we wanted to look and determine, there's a triviality to winning being the goal of your athletic programs. There's, that can't be it. With the number of people that we impact, day to day and every single year, it can't be the reason we play. It can't be the reason we coach the way we do, or that we play the way we do. There has to be something else. I'll tell you, um, when I thought back to these things, when I was coaching, I made some determinations about these. I made some determinations which one of them were really important to me and which one I wanted kids to know. And these were the three. These were the focus. I wanted kids to learn to work outside their comfort zone for an extended period of time. And when I thought about it, and you guys can think about this too, where else can you ever teach a kid to do this? I will tell you that I don't think that too many kids work way outside their comfort zone on their algebra assignment for extended periods of time. I don't think they do it in any of the other settings that we have, but if you put them out on the field, we insist that they be outside their comfort zone. And I thought that was really important. I thought role acceptance was something really important that I could teach through our program. And we talked about it. We focused on it. It was the language that we spoke. And then, I wanted them to understand when it was necessary to have a sense of urgency. I wanted them to understand what it took to have a sense of urgency. I think that it's interesting looking back now that I think having a sense of urgency was me wanting to teach. That was probably an excuse for me to coach the way I coached. I didn't necessarily, I look back and I don't necessarily like the way I coached. It was fairly intense. And there were times where I made people feel bad, which, sometimes that happens. But I think I threw a sense of urgency in there because that's a good excuse to coach that way. I used to tell parents, we would talk about a sense of urgency, and we would talk about my demeanor on the sideline, and we would talk about what other situations that kids, you might need your kids to have a sense of urgency. And I would give them this example of a semi tractor trailer barreling down the road while their kid is playing out in the middle. How exactly do they achieve the sense of urgency to get the kid out of the road right there? And this again was the excuse, for me to coach the way I coached. And so, but this was where I went. When I became an athletic director, I started thinking about this a little bit more. And I want to tell you that at some point in time, I worked my way to this being what I thought we should teach through sports: self-efficacy. And I saw a guy, his name was Rick Perea, and he came and spoke when I was at Mountain Vista. We had a coaches clinic at the beginning of the year every year, and our coaches did most of the talking, but we had this Rick Perea come, and he spoke about self-efficacy, and this was the definition that he gave: the optimistic confidence you can meet the next challenge. And he said, this is what we need to be teaching kids. We need to be teaching kids to be optimistically confident that you can meet the next challenge. And that right there really struck, it struck a nerve. I thought that's exactly right. This is the kind of thing we need. We want our kids to come out of our programs with confidence. We want them to come out with, again, the optimistic confidence that they can meet the next challenge. So this is where we were in that second year. And like I said, we tried to stack things on, that made sense. The next year, we moved on. I went to a conference in the summer with the rest of the administrative team, and we heard, and this was the educational jargon of the day, the fad of the day, I think, this idea of collective efficacy. And, it came from this researcher named John Hattie, and I looked at his book, and it's really data driven, and it's really not that interesting to read. But there was a couple of things, and I don't want to bog things down with statistics or anything, but he did these studies of educational strategies, educational tactics that you can use, and in them he came up with these numbers. They were, I don't even remember what he called the numbers, but it was for sure stats. And with each strategy, he looked at their impact on kids, and he came up with these numbers. And the numbers were the interesting thing about the numbers was if any strategy came to a 0.4, it was considered an average educational tactic. Because when I heard about it, a 0.4, they said, indicated that that strategy could lead to 1 year's growth in terms of learning. A 0.2 was below average, and a 0.6 was way above average. And a lot of the things, that we think of in teaching in the classroom are between that 0.4 and 0.6. Cooperative learning, direct instruction is at the high end of those things. But what he said, and this was where we went in our athletic programs, was what he said was, there is this tactic, or not a tactic, but this idea, collective efficacy. And a collective efficacy in his stats came up with this number 1.57, 4 times what he considered average, or almost 4 times what he considered average. 1.57, right? If we take that 0.4 and say, that it might lead to a year's growth, 1.57, right? The 4 times greater than that if this one thing happens. And so I took that idea and I just associated it with the self-efficacy that we were talking about the year before. And I said, okay, so the optimistic confidence you can meet the next challenge. What if everyone involved was optimistically confident that they could meet the next challenge, that they could be successful? And I thought about it, when I started, coaching, I was 3 years the head basketball coach at Lake County High School in Leadville. And I took that job, and I had never been an assistant before. And it took me 3 years really, because that's how long it took me to understand that I had no idea what it was going to take to be a successful head coach. So I left Leadville and I came down here, and I ended up in Littleton, and I actually ended up at Arapahoe High School as an assistant coach for a fairly legendary basketball coach in the state of Colorado. I would say perhaps the greatest high school basketball coach in Colorado, a guy named Ron Lachine. And I worked with Ron for 5 years, and I tried to learn all the things I didn't know, which was significant. I took notes, but after one practice in the second year that I was there, he said something in the coach's office to me. He said, what I would have for you, he said, what I would have for all of the guys that have coached under me is for them to one day get to see their team play the game exactly how they think the game should be played. Right. And I thought, when he said that to me, I thought that's an interesting thing, but I didn't think about it because I had never seen a team play the game exactly the way that I thought the game should be played. I thought about it because I didn't have the foggiest idea what it would look like if my team played the game exactly the way I thought the game should be played. It was an epiphany. And so I spent the next 3 years, I spent the next 4 years trying to figure out what the game of basketball would look like if it was being played the way that I think it could be played. And I think about this with this idea of collective efficacy with our coaches, right? I hear, and I've heard this, wherever. I heard it when I was coaching. I've heard it being the athletic director. I hear things like, I hear excuses like, the pipeline is dried up, or the well is dried up. The kids aren't coming. We just don't have the kids the other guys do. Well, when I think about teaching, and when I think about sports, and I think about collective efficacy, how could you ever, if you don't know exactly what it's supposed to look like when you're playing, when your team is playing, how could you ever teach your team to play at that level? Teach this, excellence at that particular level. And so we started working on that. And this ties into where we're going with this discussion, right? It's not just about the sports. I think it's really something we talk to our coaches and we ask them to think about it. And over the course of the year, standing against the fence outside or standing against the wall in the gym, I'd ask questions about what exactly it would look like. Because until you have that, not until you have that, when you have that, then you can go to the rest of your staff. Then you can go to your players. Then you can go to your community, your parent group, and you can all of a sudden start building the collective efficacy that leads to success, a collective belief, collective optimism, confidence that you will be successful. And so we looked at that, but I think what's equally as important in as understanding what it's going to look like when your team is playing the game the way that you think it should be played, is also what does it look like when your team is how you think or you think they should be. They act how you think they should act. They learn what you think they should learn. These are all the things I think that our coaches, they need to consider, and then they can go in and they can build these things, and then we can assume, or I think feel confident that we will achieve, that we will teach kids, that we will perhaps even win, when we get to those points. And so anyway, I wanted to share that, and then I wanted to, I wanted to move then, you guys, sorry, this to our next year. In 1920, let me share this screen again with you. In 1920, we moved forward, and I want to tell you that this was where we really started thinking about the mental health of our kids. Okay, we had been working through, we'd had a couple of years where we were dealing with situations like crazy, and all of a sudden we started really thinking about where our kids were, right? We had moved from just that listening tour that I was telling you about, and then we had moved through kind of, again, this shift Y thing that we messed with over here. And then we moved to the idea of collective efficacy. Well, in the fourth year here, I decided we were going to move back to self-efficacy. Instead of just making that one of the options that we were going to, that we had to teach through our athletic programs, we were going to move back and make it the focus. And I looked at this. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with this author. I think she's a sociologist at the University of Houston, named Brene Brown. And I've read her books. And if you haven't looked, you really should look at her books. There's on Netflix, there's an hour-long, it's like a TED Talk, but it's not a TED Talk because it's an hour long on Netflix, and it's done by her, and it's really fascinating. And it's not just, she doesn't, I don't know that she has a whole heck of a lot to say about coaching, but she has a whole heck of a lot to say about mental health. And she has a whole heck of a lot to say about how to conduct yourselves and how to, I don't know what exactly the topic is, and she has plenty of books. And I will tell you that if you get a chance, you can read any one of them, and they're really, really good. This one, it's titled Daring Greatly. Daring Greatly is a culmination of all of the other ones. So if you ever, if you get a chance, you should take a look at this book. And she starts the Netflix that I'm talking about. And this is where I think she gets quoted a lot. She starts with that speech that Teddy Roosevelt gave that I have right here. It's not the critic that counts, and I got a bunch of ellipsis in here. It's a longer speech than this. I just put it up here so you'd be able to, have a reference. She starts the book with that, and she starts the speech with that, and she's talking about, the man in the arena and how to live your life in the arena and that kind of thing. And I think that that's all fantastic stuff, but it's not necessarily the topic of what we're talking about here. I guess in one way, shape, or form it is. But she also buried, in the introduction or in the first chapter, I don't know, she has this quote, and I want to share this quote with you because this is where we were going in 1920. This is where we were trying to get with our athletic program. She has this quote: "When shame becomes a leadership style, engagement dies." And I thought about this like crazy. And I think that anybody who's considering, when shame becomes a leadership style, engagement dies. Everybody has had, a leader, somebody, maybe it's a principal, or maybe it's an assistant principal, or maybe it was a job that you had, when you were younger, or, a job that you had when you were a kid, where the number one leadership tactic was to shame you into doing things better or harder or whatever, right? To make you feel bad about what it is that you had done. And so when I thought about this, and I thought about shame as a leadership style, I started thinking um, even further. And I want you to know that I've moved it. And when we have been talking about this with our programs, guys, when shame becomes a factor, engagement dies. When shame becomes a factor, engagement dies. It dies in every walk of life. And it's the exact same thing with our kids. When shame becomes a factor, engagement dies. And so in order to talk about this, I want you to think for a moment. And I think it's really, really important about what are the sources of shame in our, with our kids. Like, for example, maybe, consider these things. I think since the beginning of time, right, with kids from middle school up, probably from the age of 8 on up, body image. It's one of the stereotypical sources of shame, right? Money is a source of shame. Our parents oftentimes were a source of shame. Our brothers, our sisters. I have this, this just list here again on the screen. What are whoops. I hit the leave meeting button on accident. What are the sources of shame for our kids? I wrote down a few things that can cause them to feel ashamed. You see it, you hear about it, you see stories, about kids being shamed by these things. And if you look at, you can ponder each and every one. And I think that many of these are the same thing. And so you say, well, this isn't any different. This isn't any different from when I was a kid. I mean, when I was 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, right? These were the very same things that caused me to feel ashamed of things. And there hasn't been much. I don't think that those things have changed, but there are a few that you'll see. Are there sources of shame that are new to this generation? And are they significant? And this is the thing you have to ponder. I forgot to tell you guys when I started that this talk is, you got to kind of think about it. It's not, right, it's not prescriptive. It's intended to ponder these ideas and think about what we can do in this area. But when I look at, so again, when you think about these sources of shame for kids, when I look at some of these things, I've added some because I've pondered them a little bit. Social media, right? In terms of a source of shame, gosh, guys, when I was a kid and I said something stupid, well, I might feel bad or feel ashamed because the 4 people I was talking to heard it. Now our kids, they fire something out on social media and 2,000 people saw it. And if it was something that was particularly shameful or that they end up embarrassed about, there's a multiplier there, that's for certain. I think everybody's thought about this idea, at least everybody that many of the people that I've talked to, where social media is concerned, I don't know what it is. There's a phenomenon, I think, with social media. I think I have this buddy here at work. He looks at, he's on Twitter and Facebook. He's on all these fishing communities, right? And he looks at them daily. And these people get on there and they talk about how they did during the day. And these guys, they take pictures of these glorious fish, these brown 24-inch brown trout that they catch, or gargantuan rainbow trout, or he's on ones that take pictures of walleye and they show these big fish. And he'll come from time to time to work, and he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I might need to give this up. I clearly am not any good at it. I never catch those fish. And my point is, right, and this is the phenomenon I'm talking about, is those folks are only taking pictures of the greatest fish they have. They're not taking pictures of the 310-inch trout that they caught before they caught that one, right? They're not taking pictures of their normal day. They're not taking pictures of the day they got skunked out on the river, right? And this is one of the things with social media, right, that we think about with ourselves with kids, right? Kids aren't taking pictures of their bad days either. They're taking pictures for the most part of their great days. And our kids are looking at it and they're seeing what's going on and what kind of awesomeness is happening in, the lives of their Facebook friends or Instagram or whatever the other ones, they're looking at that kind of stuff. And I suspect that there's the option for them to sit back and say, what is going on in my life that I don't have that kind of fun every day that I'm seeing on social media? Guys, I put a couple of more things up here, right, that I think are caught for, sources of shame that I didn't never have to deal with. Guys, what do you think about Infinite Campus? Right, we have a 24/7 access to every kid's grades for their parents. Any given day, their parents can take a look and go upstairs and say, what in the world is going on with this grade? What in the world is going on with you not doing your homework in this class? Why did you get an incomplete on this thing in this class? Right, it's every single day. Again, when I, and I know this wasn't the case, and I know it's a long time ago, but when I was a kid, right, I made sure to write in the front of my notebook what my grades were to know where I was, because I knew I was going to have to answer for those grades at midterm parent-teacher conferences and when my grade card came home at the end of the semester. Those were the two times I was ever going to have to answer, right? What does that do to our kids? That kind of thing. Emails, text messaging. I doubt there's anyone on here that doesn't recognize that people become a lot more bold writing an email or a text. They say things they would never say to you. And so we take a look at that email and text, and I wonder, is that a significant source, of shame that hasn't existed for very long? And guys, when we move back to, sports, I wonder about specialization. I wonder, is there a problem that we have kids that put all their eggs in one basket? And is there a multiplier in how they feel about themselves when they aren't successful? When they're doing that, when they don't have something else to step into? I wonder about these things. And I think that there's many, many more, but these are just examples. Guys, when shame becomes more than they can bear, our kids disengage. And they disengage from school. They disengage from their family. They disengage from their friends. They disengage from activities. They quit, right? And they disengage from life, and we watch it happen. And, and we get the phone calls, and they're depressed and they're feeling bad and they're suffering, and we send them in, to get help in these circumstances. Because, and I do believe, and again, like I said before, this talk is more to be considered. It's not, I obviously, I am not a researcher in the mental health field. I'm not, I just observe, and these are the things that I think about. I think that shame is the number one factor. I think about all of the kids, right? I don't think about just the kids, who have just the examples of the kids who have disengaged and have, the worst has happened. I think about those kids that we talk about that we're trying to deal with their mental health issues, that we're trying to deal with depression, that we're trying to deal with disengagement. And you guys, I haven't found an example where I can't find significant sources of shame. I can't. And so I look at this and I think that it's something that has to be considered. And the thing that's important, I think one of the things that's very important is when I look at how we deal with these kids, when I look at how we deal, and again, now we're not dealing necessarily with what I'm talking about in terms of shame. Now we're dealing with, how do we deal with the kid that seems to be depressed? How do we deal with the kid that seems to be suffering from mental health issues, that seems to be suffering altogether? And I will tell you that it seems to me that we're utterly reactive, reactionary. And I think that what I want to talk about here for some of this time is how to maybe be a little bit more proactive, how we might be able to look at an approach to dealing with, again, the shame and the mental health problems that come from it in a more proactive manner. And so I ask this question when I tell you that I think that shame is the factor. I am certain there are more factors, but I think that shame is the factor. And I ask this question: can we eliminate shame from our kids' lives? And the answer, I think, obviously, is that we cannot. I don't think we can eliminate the idea that they might feel ashamed, or they might feel embarrassed by something, or they might, when not successful, this might be something that happens. However, when we move back to this idea that I'm telling you, and that we kind of started looking at in 1920, I go back to Rick Perea and this thought that he had when he was given this talk to us. If you're a coach and you don't think it's your job to teach self-efficacy, you desperately need to find something else to do. If you don't think it is your job to teach kids to be optimistically confident that they can meet the next challenge, you probably need to find something else to do. And I think that that's right. And again, the reason I think that's right is because when we look at this, when we look at the direction where we have this disengagement from kids, when we have kids that disengage from, school, family, friends, activities, we want to counter that, right? This is the proactive approach, right? Instead of dealing with the suffering after the fact, instead of dealing with them feeling bad after the fact, how do we proactively address the issue? And I think that the way we proactively address the issue is by teaching them self-efficacy, by spending our time teaching them self-efficacy. And I will tell you, when we look, when we look at how to teach self-efficacy, and I'll get to this in a minute, one of the prime factors in being able to teach it is high interest. It's, you can teach kids to be optimistically confident they can meet the next challenge through high interest activities. I had this other book, and it's just you guys have probably seen it. The book's title is Grit, and it's by this lady, Angela Duckworth, and I'm not exactly sure what she does. I think she's probably a researcher too. But she has this portion in the book where she talks about 300, there's a study she looked at. She didn't do the study, I don't think, but she was looking at a study, and this lady studied the 300 and some. There was more than 300, but it was like 300 and some most accomplished individuals of all time, right? And they were accomplished, like one of them was Copernicus, right? So we're talking of all time, not, she looked at this guy, Copernicus. She looked at Isaac Newton. She looked at, and George Washington, right? George Washington was in that group. And then you got like Bill Gates and that kind of list. But anyway, it was 300 of these people who were this accomplished. And what this lady found in this study was that of all of these 300 people that were highly acclaimed, super accomplished in whatever the field, was that if you took them all as a whole, they all essentially had an average intelligence level, an average intelligence quotient, roughly the same as the rest of the human population. They weren't overly smart. They weren't, there were some that had higher, obviously when you're taking an average, there were some that had higher IQs than the average. And there were also some that had much lower IQs than the average. But what this study found was that of these 300 people, the average IQ was about the same as everybody else. And so what Angela Duckworth did in this book, or what was proposing, was that there must have been another factor, that it wasn't just intelligence that led them to come up with the laws of gravity, or whatever, or to determine that the Earth was not the center of the universe, or whatever those guys did. What she decided was it was this thing that she called grit. And if you guys, I'm sure that many have looked at that book. I think a lot of people have read that book. she decided that was what it was, is grit, the stick-to-itiveness, the idea that you can work through and, you know, try and figure something out and fail and have some success and try and work through and continue to work through. And over the course of a lifetime, you can have the accomplishments that these kind of people have. And this was what she defined as grit. And when you look at the, you know, grit itself, you know, and if you look on the Google search and the synonyms, you know, courage and bravery and mettle, a backbone, spirit, moral fiber, steel, perseverance, resiliency, you know, those things that are on there. These are what she determined. And my thought on the matter is, maybe that is what is the cause of their success, or maybe it has something very much to do with self-efficacy. Maybe it has to do with the fact that they had built through a series of successes and failures and trying again, an optimistic confidence that they could indeed meet the next challenge, that they could indeed get to where they wanted to be. Now, I don't know for certain, but the list of synonyms for grit, those also might be the list of synonyms that describe self-efficacy. However, I think maybe this is an important thing for us to get to here, and that is where we were going to go in 2021, right? In 1920, we got to the point where we knew we had to teach our kids this. We knew we had to get them to that spot where we could counterbalance the, you know, the effects of being ashamed, the effects of what their lives were throwing at them. And we decided we would teach them to be confident individuals, that we would teach them to be optimistically confident. And so 2021, it threw all of us a little bit of a curve. We didn't get to have our initial coaches meeting. We didn't get to build on the theme of 1920. We didn't get to move into our parent meetings and our mandatory player meetings and talk about where we were going to go with that. And so we did get to have postseason meetings with our fall coaches from 1920, and we did get to talk in depth about these, and I can see the impact. I can see what's happening in some of our fall programs, but you know, because we got to talk about where we were going to go, and I got to see them start doing it. But let me just show you here where it is that we were going to go. In 2021, we were going to go in the direction of teaching self-efficacy and the language of accomplishment. We want to move into this area. We want to move into being able to teach kids to be this. And what I know about teaching kids, and these are the things that we've talked about again with very few of our coaches, we're going to plan to move forward after this brief timeout. I think we were like most of you guys on March 13th of 2020. You know, we sent an email out to all of our coaches and we said, no matter what, keep these kids engaged, right? With everything else to time out. We said, you keep these kids engaged. And they started brainstorming how in the world they could virtually keep kids engaged in, you know, baseball and lacrosse and, you know, tennis. And they did an unbelievable job with it. But like I said, we kind of stopped with the pattern that we were moving forward towards. But this is where we're going. And this is, you know, guys, I know that I mentioned earlier that these are things that you have to consider. They're things to think about. You can't come in, this isn't, you know, I'm not giving any recipe for something that I think should be done. You've got to think about whether or not, you know, you agree. I do think for sure I'm sure, or I'm right about the shame issue. And I do think for sure I'm right about. And so when I look into how do you teach self-efficacy, we go back to, you know, when we were talking about why we coach and why we coach the way we do and what it is that we value in sports. One of the very most important things about teaching it is intentionality, right? We have to be intentional about teaching it. And it is not overly complicated. You can find online all kinds of recipes. They are for sure, there is for sure value in modeling success, in seeing success. There is for sure value in the 4 components of self-efficacy, whatever you find when you do the Google search. But I think that there is some simplicity in teaching it. I read an article, and I feel bad because I can't cite who wrote this article. I don't know, but it was talking about teaching self-efficacy, and it said you place in front of them small achievable challenges. You place in front of them small achievable challenges and let them achieve, right? Or let them fail. But then you place another achievable challenge in front and you let them make the effort. And over the course of one achievable challenge and then another achievable challenge, all of a sudden they start to build the confidence that they will meet the very next challenge. They might not meet it the first time. There may be a failure because it's a succession of activities. But they start to build that confidence with the achievable challenge. Now, the achievable challenge, obviously, I think that this is obvious, right? The idea is that it, of course, is achievable and that it is a challenge. Even in that article, the guy pointed out that you don't put your varsity softball team against the 5th graders in the rec district. Because although achievable and although they will be successful, it is not a challenge and they will build no confidence through that kind of activity. Okay, they build it again, and it's got to be, there's got to be some intentionality through small achievable challenges in series until that point in time where they believe that they'll meet the next one. And then equally as important is the genuine recognition of achievement, right? When they achieve, we have to recognize it, right? And it can be in group and it can be by individual, but we have to be intentional about telling them what the challenge is. And then we have to recognize, there has to be recognition of the achievement that follows. I think it's critical in order to building that kind of confidence. And I think that this is the reason that we're talking about this here. I think that we all work in the field that is the most logical for this. Athletics is I built this thing, and again, I apologize for my tech skills. If we look at this situation, we look at where we have our kids, right? If we just take a kid playing basketball, and we can start, when we start this discussion, we can start with 9th graders, right? My thing here, right. This also could start with a 5th grader. It could start with it doesn't make it, it could start with whatever age the kid starts playing the sports. But if we're intentional and we start teaching the basic fundamental skills, what it is that we're trying to do anyway through coaching, and if we recognize when they achieve, right? If we give a kid a basketball and we tell him to get into triple threat, and then we recognize when he's in triple threat, and then we say, okay, now out of this triple threat, we want you to shoot it, and we teach them how to shoot, right? And we recognize when their shot looks great, and then we keep going and we teach them how to pass and we teach them how to dribble, and then we build on that and we teach them out of that triple threat direct drive and a crossover and whatever the skills are that you want to teach, and we move through those and we build these small achievable challenges, and we build the confidence in the kid that he can meet them, right? And as we move forward and we get these kids into a higher level, we continue with the skill development, right? We continue in high school with athletic development. One of our greatest examples of doing this so far, again, because it was a fall sport and it happened before we were all sent home, is football. Our football team, in terms of athletic development, I'm not talking any different from anybody else's football team. I'm sure they've all been in the weight room. They've all been working like crazy, even virtually. I'm sure they were all doing that. But the amount of recognition of achievement, right, over the course of the years, and or the course of the year that we've been out, right, on Twitter and through emails, emails every other day out to the community talking about the achievement of these guys, right? It's same thing with our cross country. But we move through, skill development, athletic development, right? Into team development, right? Once we have those fundamental skills, let's add another player. Let's add 2 more players, 4 more players, right? Let's add a few more players to the soccer field and see what we can do and put achievable challenges in front of the group. Let's put achievable challenges in terms of their thinking, right? I remember this quote. It used to be one of my favorites from old Bobby Knight. He said, in basketball, the mental is to physical is 4:1, right? How many achievable challenges are there in the mental part of every game that we play? And then we put in front of them achievable challenges in terms of those life skills that I had and all the life skills you want to teach, and then we keep moving to individual and team improvement and all the way until we have the finest teams that we can have. Do you think our kids will come out of that with some kind of confidence that they can meet some challenges? I think for sure, right? I think I think that they will. Guys, the language of accomplishment, this is what I'm talking about. We have to recognize, when people achieve. We have to recognize when they accomplish. Guys, I want you to know that the language of accomplishment is not, what's the word? Not Pollyanna language. It's not gilding the lily. It's not just positive, right? It does not eliminate criticism. The language of accomplishment requires honesty. Our coaches have to tell kids where they stand. You guys, this is one of the things I've seen, and so you guys probably have too, with young coaches, right? They have a hard time telling the truth to parents, especially players, right? It's always good. We sugarcoat a lot. I suppose old coaches sugarcoat a lot too. But we have to be honest. We had a coach here. He was before I came here, but I've heard this enough times. He would sit, and one of our coaches, I'd asked, how often did this statement come out of his mouth? He said, at least once or twice a week. This came out of his mouth. He was a basketball coach. But they'd be sitting in meetings, and he would say to the kids, have the intestinal fortitude to tell your parents the truth. Right? He would say, when they call me and ask why you're not playing more, you know why you're not playing more. Have the intestinal fortitude to tell your parents the truth, right? Guys, if in some effort to build self-efficacy amongst our players, in some effort to build confidence that they can meet the next challenge, not just on the field, but the next challenge in life, they have to have the intestinal fortitude to tell their parents the truth, to tell you the truth, to tell their coach the truth, to tell themselves the truth, to tell their friends the truth, right? Then you start working from it. Guys, the language of accomplishment requires intentional goal setting. We have to talk to kids about where they are, and we have to let them set goals. We have to help them set goals. We want intentional goal setting to happen. But more importantly, the reason that we want the goals, I think, is because we want the affirmations. We want to get to the end of that goal, and we want to affirm it. We want to say, look what you did. Fantastic how that worked. And guys, achievement cannot be ignored. We can't keep moving through and letting people accomplish and then just ignore the achievement and move on to something else that we need to coach. It cannot be ignored. Now I know, you guys, that when I look at this stuff and when I think about it, I know that this discussion is, I think, ponder this for a second. I think if we start doing this, right? I know this discussion is probably better suited for everyone, right? The general school community. I listened to John yesterday talking about middle school. This discussion is probably better suited for middle school. It's probably better suited for, other areas in the community. But you guys, this is what we do. We do high school sports, and I think there's a lot that can be done here. We have an enormous captive audience, and I believe this. I really believe it. I've seen it a little bit, enough that, guys, if we start talking about accomplishment, and if we start talking about self-efficacy and constantly talk about achievable challenges, and if we recognize achievement, it becomes contagious. Kids will start speaking the language of accomplishment with their peers. They'll start speaking it with their parents. Parents will start speaking it with each other, right? They'll start speaking it with their teachers. And we will start working in a manner where we're looking at accomplishment a little bit more in this circumstance. Um, I don't know. That's where I am with that. And um,
Great job, Pat. Wow, really impressed, buddy. That's great stuff, and I see a lot of the similar, kind of themes with what Dobbs was talking about yesterday. With, what you said. Shame can't be a big part of what you do as a coach anymore, or just should not be. And Dobbs talked a little bit about seeing those dysfunctional coaches. And, if we could recognize a little bit of that, I think we could really support kids in the long run.
I do think I do think, when I think about, how do we combat shame? I think we can minimize it, to be sure. But I think when you coach, right, there are going to be times where kids are embarrassed or ashamed of whatever, right? You can't be the intentional shamer anymore. I don't think. I think that's right. But anyway.
Well, Pat, one question, and then we got to wrap it up because we're going to get into awards next. Where do you think player ownership of the process and the team fits within your philosophy?
I think they have to be a humongous part of it, right? In terms of what we're talking about, one of the reasons that I wanted to bring out how we maneuvered into our second year is because we took our theme from just being a coach-centered theme to a parent and player. We're asking the same things of them. Guys, the players have to be enormous parts of the goals, right? They have to recognize where they stand. They have to set goals. They have to look at it too in order to build these things. But we have to be a guide, because I will tell you how many players in our entire program understand the term self-efficacy and know that it can be something that's worked on. They have to be enormous, but they have to be guided through the process.
Very well done, Pat. This is an excellent presentation, buddy. I'm very impressed, and I've seen a lot in the chat, people saying the same. So thank you very much. And thanks to EV Studios. And we're going to log off, and everyone log into the business and awards section starting in about 4 or 5 minutes. Great job, Pat. Appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah.
All right, Brody, let's get Matt logged on here.
Awesome. Yeah, let me find him. Oh, there he is. Promote.
He's been waiting patiently.
Yep.
There he is, that guy right there.
There he is.
I'm on. Woohoo. Sorry, Brody.
Put your mask on, Matt. Come on.